How someone can think that you can leave a human being, even two, in such a tiny place.
The crimes were so horrific, they sent the country of Belgium reeling into national mourning, which erupts into fury over revelations of how police bungled the investigation. Grieving families lead the nation in a fight to find the truth in the trial of Marc Dutroux. March 2004, the court of Assises Arlon, Belgium. 44-year-old Marc Dutroux arrives to stand trial. Today, the parents of children he is accused of kidnapping see him face to face. Over the next 16 weeks, the full horror of what happened to the 6 abducted girls will be revealed. For Paul Marchal, the father of 17-year-old Anne, some of the evidence is so gruesome, he collapses through distress.
I was on the trial every day, every hour I was there, during 4 months.
Dutroux's horrific crime spree starts in June 1995, when 8-year-olds Julie Lejeune and Melissa Rousseau vanish after spending the afternoon playing together. 2 months later, teenage friends Anne Marchal and Effie Lambrec disappear from a holiday resort. Frustrated by inadequate police responses, Anne's distraught parents launch their own search for the girl.
I began to make a poster with disappeared, Anne, Effie, there. Phone us, please, let us know something.
In just 2 months, 4 girls have gone missing. A year later, police still have no leads. Then, 12-year-old Sabine Dardenne disappears on her way to school. 2 months later, 14-year-old Laetitia Deleuze also seems to vanish. But a witness spotted the battered old van used to abduct her.
Someone noted the number plate of the car, and he told it to the police. They started checking the combination in their listings, and they found the name of Marc Dutroux.
On August 13th, 1996, police raid one of Dutroux's 7 rundown houses in the Charleroi region of West Belgium. They arrest everyone there. 39-year-old unemployed electrician Marc Dutroux. His wife, 37-year-old Michel Martin. And 25-year-old drug addict Michel Elifre. 2 days later, after listening to a flurry of phone calls Dutroux received the night Laetitia went missing, police arrest 55-year-old businessman Michel Nioul. After 48 hours of questioning, Dutroux breaks and leads police to his house in Marcinelle. In the basement, they find 2 young girls. They've been kept locked in a cage 1 meter wide, 2 meters long, and just over 1.5 meters high. They are 14-year-old Laetitia Deleuze and 12-year-old Sabine Dardenne. Laetitia has been in the cage for almost a week. Sabine has been there for nearly 3 months. The fact that 2 girls survived such an ordeal gives Paul Marchal hope he may yet find his daughter, Anne, alive. She's now been missing for a year.
We saw that Sabine has lived for more than 2 months in there, and so it was possible. And so I believe that we could find Anne and Effie alive, and perhaps Julie and Melissa too.
But Paul's hopes are dashed when Dutroux leads police to the graves of other kidnapped girls. In the garden of his house in Sarre-la-Bizière, police uncover the remains of Julie Lejeune and Melissa Rousseau. 18 miles away in his house in Jumet, buried beneath a shed, are Anne Marchal and Effie Lambrec.
At that moment, it was a sort of release that we found Anne and Effie. Alive or dead, it helps that you can find them.
At the girls' funerals, the nation comes out to grieve.
It's not normal to lose a child. It's normal that you lose your father or your mother because they are older and everyone must go someday, but not the child.
In the weeks that follow the funerals, the public mood shifts. Profound grief turns to anger as it's revealed that police incompetence on a breathtaking scale is partly to blame for the terrible deaths of these 4 innocent girls.
The incredible thing is that during this operation, he kidnapped 2 other girls, but they didn't, for some strange reason, they didn't notice.
Marc Dutroux is in custody for the assault and murder of 4 girls and the abduction of 2 girls discovered in his home. The people of Belgium are outraged to learn that Dutroux has a record of this kind of behavior. Dutroux was released in 1987 after serving just 6 of his 13-year sentence for kidnapping and raping children. In fact, the police had placed him under surveillance 2 weeks after the disappearance of the first 2 girls, Julie and Melissa.
They put a camera in front of his house. They followed him during several weeks. And the incredible thing is that during this operation, he kidnapped 2 other girls, but they didn't, for some strange reason, they didn't notice. Evie tried to escape. She was naked on the roof of the house at a certain moment, but the camera didn't pick up the image.
What's more, Dutroux's own mother had sent a letter to police stating that 2 teenagers were being kept in a cage in her son's basement. And most incredible of all, officers raided Dutroux's Marcinelle house twice, specifically looking for the kidnapped girls. In a particularly cruel twist, while searching the cellar, officers heard girls' voices on the other side of the wall, but left without investigating further. Their final blunder was to confiscate homemade child pornography and videos in which Dutroux is actually filmed constructing the cage. They never watched the tapes.
I find it difficult to believe that. It's not possible. There should only be incompetent people, and that the incompetent people were working on our case.
Most of the Belgian people agree with Jean-Denis. Rumors of a police cover-up start to circulate. They are reinforced when Marc Dutroux presents his defense. He claims he didn't act alone and is part of a pedophile network with high-level government connections.
A network is when several people together do a handle in abusing, violating children for money, for a lot of money, and I'm sure that it exists.
Now, an important new player enters the scene. Lead investigator, Judge Jean-Marc Connerat. He takes the pedophile network allegations seriously and launches a nationwide appeal for witnesses. But just when he starts to make progress, he's removed from the case. Dutroux's lawyers successfully claim he's biased in favor of the victims, but his firing fuels allegations of a cover-up.
When Connerat was taken out of this case, the Belgian people don't accept it.
In a mass demonstration known as the White March, over 300,000 people protest in the streets of Brussels, the Belgian capital.
There was anger, there was a lot of emotional feelings at that moment.
White symbolizes the innocence of children. The march is an outpouring of public anger and a gesture of support for the grieving families. Despite the public outcry over the case, it's not until 2004, 7 years later, that it is brought to trial. Finally, the court would hear the grim details from the survivors, and the public would cling to the hope that Dutroux and his co-defendants are brought to justice. In 2004, 7 years after Marc Datroux's arrest, the 47-year-old is charged with conspiracy, kidnapping, rape, and murder. His co-defendants are also facing trial. Datroux's now ex-wife, 44-year-old Michelle Martin, is charged with conspiracy, kidnapping, and rape. Michel Lelifre, 32, is charged with conspiracy, kidnapping, and rape. 62-year-old businessman Michel Nihoul is charged with kidnapping, drug dealing, human trafficking, and conspiracy. The 3 co-defendants deny all charges. Datroux admits to abduction and rape, but pleads not guilty to all murder charges. The court first hears the traumatic account of how 8-year-old friends Julie Lejeune and Melissa Rousseau were kidnapped and for 8 months kept in a cage in Datroux's basement.
You couldn't stand up. It was like that big, that high. You couldn't even put the dog in such a tiny place.
In November 1995, Marc Datroux was sent to jail for car theft. The 2 imprisoned little girls were left in the hands of Datroux's then wife, Michelle Martin.
As far as we know, when Marc Datroux comes out of jail, the boat is still alive. But they die on the same day, and he buries them in Sarre-la-Bussière.
Michelle Martin confesses that she brought food to the house for her dogs, but she didn't feed the children. The court has little time to recover from the sickening testimony before they hear the fate of Anne Marchal and Effier Lambrec. The 2 teenagers were kept in Datroux's house in Marcinelle for about 10 days, where they were repeatedly raped. Then they were driven 18 miles to Jumet in the north of Charleroi.
They've been given medication to sleep, and then they've been buried. They have been buried alive. But the explanation of Marc Datroux was, after all, we discovered that they were too old for what we were looking for.
There is no let-up in the horror. Datroux's surviving victims, Sabine Dardenne and Laetitia Deleuze, take the stand. Laetitia was locked in the cage for 6 days. She recounts how she was led up from the cellar, chained to a bed, and raped. Sabine was held captive for 80 days. Her testimony reveals how Datroux tortured her psychologically as well as physically.
Sabine kept a diary. He made her believe that this was a case of money, that her family had to pay for her, but that the family didn't answer his letters.
12-year-old Sabine wrote letters to her family, which were read to the court. In them, she describes what she calls the room of agony, where Datroux took pornographic photos and raped her. When cross-examined about the pedophile network, she says she was only ever abused by Marc Datroux.
Sabine Dardenne has never seen anybody else except Marc Datroux. So she's the biggest opponent of all these theories about pedophile rings. She says, I haven't seen anything of it, and there's nobody who's been closer than her.
Before Sabine and Laetitia can leave the trial behind, there is a final ordeal to overcome. Before the trial of Marc Datroux comes to a close, families of his victims are taken to the scene of the crimes, the house in Marcinelle where the girls were tortured. They see firsthand the room of agony. Downstairs, they enter the dungeon-like basement. It has never been heated, and it's cold and damp. This is the removable wall which hid the cage. Now off its hinges, the hollow space behind is accessible and brightly lit for the court. But the children imprisoned there shared one lamp. It would have been dark. This is where Julie and Melissa starved to death. On June 14th, the jury starts their deliberations. It takes 4 days for them to return a verdict.
Question numéro 11, oui.
Michelle Martin is found guilty on all counts. She is sentenced to 30 years in prison. Lelivre is guilty on all counts as well. He gets 25 years. The jury can't come to a decision on the businessman, Nioul. He is later acquitted of kidnapping by 1 vote, but found guilty of drug dealing, human trafficking, and conspiracy. He is sentenced to 5 years. Datrou is found guilty on all counts of kidnapping, rape, conspiracy, and murder, and is sentenced to life in prison. He's to be kept at the government's disposition, which means they can choose never to release him. After the verdict, there is relief outside the courthouse. For Betty and Paul Marchal, it's been a long time coming.
After almost 9 years, but now I'm feeling better, much better.
For the 2 young women who survived Datrou's dungeon, the verdict brings justice, but it cannot end their suffering.
Libéré d'un poids, je dirais pas ça parce que je vais quand même vivre avec encore des années.
I wouldn't say that it has lifted the weight off my shoulders, because I will have to live with the memory for many years to come. But at least I've been listened to. I was heard. And now I will get on with my life as before. It's done now.
But 7 years after the deaths of their daughters, Paul Marchal and Jean-Denis Lejeune are granted no closure.
Justice has been done for Sabine and Letitia, where the elements have been checked, exposed, confessed. As for us, we still know nothing at all. The question is whether one day we will ever know.